Be your child's external regulator. When they can't regulate themselves, we know from neuroscience, they need to borrow your nervous system in that moment. So if you can stay present, they're going to use your breath, your heart rate, your tone of voice to calm themselves. And that's going to help them feel safe. That's going to decrease the fight or flight.
Welcome to the Soaring Child Podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm your host, Dana Kay. Hello parents, this is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child Podcast. This week I am welcoming back one of our regulars, Ashley Gobeil. How are you going, Ashley?
I'm well. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, I'm more than welcome. I love when you come here. I always leave these podcasts feeling calm, relaxed, and ready to tackle parenting. Because parenting can be tough. Let's be realistic here.
Yeah.
But I want to say something completely off tangent, and I do tend to go off tangent a lot of the time. How are you going? That is an Australian saying. And I remember when I first arrived in the US, I was at my kids' playground and a friend came up and she goes, "Hi." And I'm like, "Hi, going?" And she's like, "I'm not going anywhere." And I'm like, sorry, like, how are you? So I actually didn't realize that how you're going is an Australian thing. So anyway, completely off tangent. But I am really, really excited to chat with you today because we're actually going to talk about the most frequently asked questions from parents inside our program in the coaching calls in relation to parenting, because Ashley is our resident parent and behavioral therapist that does weekly group coaching calls inside our program. So I'm excited to dive into this, Ashley.
Yes. And you know what? These are frequently asked questions by most parents I work with as well.
Really? Okay. So it's not just inside our program, but it's also outside the program. So let's dive in, because I'm sure that the parents listening today were like, yes, let's dive in. Give me as much information as possible. So this is a real common one. Okay. And I know that I could probably ask it myself. How do I get my child to do X? Like, how do I get my child to clean up his room or stop doing Y? Like, stop badgering his brother. How do I get my child to do this or stop doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is probably the number one question parents come to me with is like, how do I get my kid to do what I want them to do or stop doing what I want them to stop doing? And so that is usually the point where I go, okay, we actually kind of need to take a bit of a pause and start to look at it differently. Because I've always got that, Dr. Ross Green in my head by going, if these kids could do well, they would, If they can, they will. And when they can, they will. So it's really here, I guess, thinking about how do we shift our parenting mindset? Because if we go in with the mindset of, well, my kid's choosing to do well, or it's a conscious decision, this behavior, then we're going to get caught up in those compliance battles. We're going to stress ourselves out trying to change the behavior in the moment. And instead, I guess my role is to start to support parents to look at the behavior differently. What's going on in my child's physiology? I don't know, you talk to parents about what's that inflammation level that's causing that hyperarousal? How are they experiencing the world? What's their nervous system doing? And for kids specifically with ADHD, we know their nervous system's really hypersensitive. So it is going into that default activation of fight or flight, in the moment. And it's often something that they cannot control. It's kind of the way that their brain has been wired at the moment. And so we need to start thinking about how do we provide them with those opportunities to experience co-regulation empathy, and soothing. So then parents usually go, oh, okay, yeah, I know that they could do well if, they could. But, I've used curiosity and I used empathy and I used your name it to tame it, Ashley. I tried that and it's not working. And, I was just like, okay, well, what do you think would look like? And they'll often go, well, I'd want them to still stop doing X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we're still now using the tools with that agenda, so sometimes it can be a really tough shifting our mindset around that our child often can't control what they're doing. And instead, how do we support them in building that emotional regulation? How do we reduce their inflammation and try to get them back into, I know we've talked about this, Dana, before, their optimal zone of arousal. Like, how do we get them in that window of tolerance so that they can start to make better choices in the moment? We talked a lot about recently in coaching calls around, okay, if it feels like it's not working because you're still really focused on changing that behavior, what if we think about the aim of using, those parenting tools we've talked about, the empathy, the connection before correction? What if we think about the aim of that is to simply leave your child with the experience of feeling seen, heard, soothed, validated, and just acknowledged for all parts of themselves. And that experience, that new way of parenting or that new way of being with them, leaves your child with that kind of, experience, which ultimately starts to reduce their shame. And it does start to reduce those behaviors over time. Might not change it tomorrow, might not change it next week, because they might need that persistent experience or that new way of responding to them. And over time, this is the long route of parenting that we keep talking about versus that short-term goal of how do I get my kid to comply? Instead, it's thinking about how do I start to reduce those barriers around them? How do I support their nervous system? How do we build new neural pathways so that they can start to do well? Does that make sense, Donna? That kind of, if they can do well, they would.
Yeah, look, all of that makes total sense. And I know that with our kids, they will do well when they can. And, I remember you talking to me previously about that we hold the keys to our child's nervous system. And when you go forward with that knowledge, it all makes total sense. So as parents, I know our lives get so busy. We want our kid to stop doing what they're doing because it's stopping us from going here. Or we want them to do something so we can go to this place. We have to go to this activity. But if we just take that stress out of the equation and realize that we hold the keys to their nervous system, we can reduce that stress response in them, then, the whole thing changes because our attitude towards what they do changes as well.
Yeah, that is exactly it, Donna. Like, we're shifting kind of our way of viewing it. And when our mindset shifts, then that's going to guide our actions and it's going to guide how we approach it. So sometimes it's taking that pressure off, letting go of the tug of war. And it doesn't mean it's not going to be frustrating for a parent. It's not going to be annoying. Like, it's still okay to acknowledge our feelings through that. But as you said, if we can kind of stay grounded in that and go, okay, I'm the container for my child's nervous system and their experience of safety in that nervous system.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I know I will have a lot of listeners thinking to themselves, well, but still, how do I get my child to do this? What do you say to that?
It takes time to shift this way of thinking. I know I've been talking about the short-term goals of parenting versus the long-term. And that, how do I get my kid to do this? You can use approaches that, might not be great for their nervous system, but maybe it does get you where you need to be. But then often everyone is, I don't know if you've had that experience, when everyone gets in the car, everyone's stressed and upset and it's all terrible. Okay, but we got out of the house. So that short-term goal of, okay, I got the behavior to stop. But if we're thinking about what's our long-term goal, it's about how do we set up these children for life? How do we build their self-regulation so that they can have self-discipline and make those choices later on? Do we want to have a really strong relationship with them so when they do hit adolescence or later on that they can come to us with the big stuff versus being worried about how we're going to react? So thinking about how do we want things to be in our relationship with them in the years. And that's the foundation we're setting up.
Definitely. And, I obviously talk a lot about inflammation, and inflammation drives ADHD symptoms, and stress is
huge,
huge in driving inflammation. And so if we can reduce stress in the house, if we can reduce stress from our point of view, that's obviously then going to translate onto our child, which in turn is going to reduce inflammation, which in turn is going to reduce ADHD symptoms. So look, the next big question that we get asked so much, obviously I talk about reducing inflammation, changing the diet to reduce that inflammation. How do you explain that dietary changes to a child? And, how do you get them on board? Obviously I have my thoughts on it, but I'd love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, so this is a big one that gets asked, in particular when parents are finding that their child really doesn't want to get on board. So it's like, okay, how do we go back and explain this? And how do we kind of get, kids a little bit maybe excited about it? And if they're not, what do we do about it? So I kind of think about what are the key messages that we want to get across in that conversation with our child. And this is kind of regardless of any age, Dana. You might change the language a little bit depending on the age. So firstly, it's like, okay, we need to explain to them the what. What is going to change? Be really clear and really honest that you're not going to get to eat this anymore, and you might go, everyone in the house is doing this, or so it's really explaining the what is exactly is going to happen. And in that moment, when we start to say, you're not going to be able to eat your cheese anymore. You're not going to be able to have that bread that you like. Parents are saying, my kid is then moving into a meltdown. They're really upset. They're getting angry. Okay, we lean into that. So acknowledge the emotion, which is letting them grieve. We've been talking with a family who's been coming through the program she had a 10-year-old who's been very distressed, like went and threw everything in the pantry, all the new healthy stuff, and was really angry about the changes. And so rather than moving into that, we just got to force her. She's just got to do it this way. How do we get her to do it? Which was that first question we talked about. Instead was maybe we need to slow it down and really move into letting her grieve those losses, because it can be really hard. It makes them feel different. They really love their pizza or whatever it is that they're going to have to be changing. So acknowledging that emotion, but with true empathy. Like, we've got to be a little bit authentic in it and go, it feels really sad that you can't have that, hey? And the next bit around explaining the why we're doing it. So a lot of parents go, how do we explain why are we doing this? Okay. So we're talking about the food and the mind, body, and connection, which is probably a lot of what you do, Dana, right? It's like, how do we support them to understand the gut and the behavioral connection? So we talk about, foods like our dairy and our cheese and sugar and, the gluten and the wheat, this is the stuff that creates things in our stomach that sometimes makes it hard to manage those really big feelings that come up. Have you ever noticed, or I know we're having a really hard time. I notice that you're finding it really hard to focus at school. So you might reflect on some of the things they're already struggling with and trying to connect that back to, hey, we're going to be changing this food because our understanding is it might help you feel clearer in your brain. It might be easier to get calm in our body after we've had a big feeling. And again, some of the language you might use might be different for an adolescent to a younger kid. And what's really amazing about the why, and I'm not sure how you explain this to parents, Dana, is that when they start making these diet changes, and then let's say they have a really tricky day a month later where they've eaten it. Okay. And then the parents then they've had a meltdown, and we noticed they were bouncing off the walls and they had got in trouble at school. Okay. Yeah. You had a really tough day and we've fallen off the track a bit. Let's use that as a teaching moment.
Yes.
Let's connect. Let's have that conversation with that child to go, hey, did you notice that day when we ate that you had a really tough day at school and you got in trouble? I know you don't want to get in trouble. So it's really important we think about it's that food that's really impacted. And over time, so it's like, how do we use those as teaching moments?
Yeah, no, look, I have to say that I I love those moments because they're the perfect opportunity for them to really correlate how they're feeling with what they've eaten. And, very similar in the way that I talk about things. I actually like to have like a body check-in every single day before we have dinner. And, we'll go, and this is not only, to help to correlate food with feelings and behavior, but also like being aware of changes in our body. So we go around the table and I'll say, today I felt happy. And what that feels like for me inside is I feel like the color yellow, and I feel like I want to smile, and I feel like I just want to hug you and be around you and dance. And I like to feel happy. That's what I prefer to feel like. And then on a day that I'm having, a hard day, I'll say, well, today I felt really sad. I don't like to feel sad, but it's okay to have that emotion. All the different emotions are okay. And what that feels like inside my body is that, I just feel a bit blue, and I feel like blah, and I want to be by myself. And so, going around, and at first, you're obviously putting words into their mouth because they don't really understand what's going on in their body. But it really builds that knowledge and insight into those body feelings. And then, as you said, when they have a day where they went out and they ate gluten and they're paying for it and everyone else is paying for it around them, afterwards, once they've gotten off that bandwagon, you can say, hey, buddy, I noticed that you were angry today. Don't ask them when they're in the middle of the anger. Obviously, come back to them when they've come off that. And say, look, I know you've said to me that you prefer to feel happy, and you ate something and then you were angry. And that's exactly why we're doing what we're doing. Because then they can start to really see how it affects their body. My son, he's 13. He's been eating this way for years, but there are times where, he just can't control himself and he just wants to eat what that thing is that these friends are having. And he knows what he's doing, and he knows that he's going to suffer from it later. But he just makes that conscious decision. But he knows that, and we can get back on the bandwagon pretty quickly after that happens. And so I completely agree with everything that you're saying.
What an awesome example, Donna, of that. What you do at the dinner table, that body scan. Because not only is that bringing it's like inviting them into tuning into their body sensations, their experience, building that body awareness, but it's connecting it back to an emotion as well.
Yeah.
And it's giving them emotional literacy. So I know a lot of parents do say like, oh, is that putting words into my kid's mouth? Well, we have to remember the research and the neurobiology research and attachment research talks about children learn about their experience of the world through our experience of what we think their experience of the world is and how we verbalize it. So it only does wonders for their emotional self-regulation when we can support them to make sense of feelings, to connect it back to a color or, oh, yeah, noticed you were really angry. Did it feel like you had a hot lava in your chest? Or, And it gives them all those words and helps them put words to it later on.
Definitely. And look, it's a skill that when I look back, I wish that I was taught that at a young age. And, it would have helped me through my 20s and my 30s. Now if I feel the little ounce of like a tiny scratch in my throat, I know I'm getting sick. I can go be preemptive. I can take all my herbs and all the good stuff, the natural stuff, and I can get rid of that cold and flu like overnight. And if I had known that previously, I could have really, really helped with that. So it doesn't not only help with emotions, it helps with body feelings, sickness, all of that sort of stuff. It's really being totally self-aware of what is going on in your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So look, I think the next big one that we get asked is about sort of routines. And I think like we have some families that come and really struggle with the mornings. Then we have other families that really struggle at bedtime. And other families, and I remember back in the day when my son used to get home from school before we were able to sort of reduce his symptoms, we really struggled with the afternoon and that homework and things like that. So how do you, what's your advice around all of that?
Wow, this is always a big one when parents bring in. As you said, it could be the morning, it could be the evening, could be the afternoons. So I usually sit in a lot of curiosity around this. So I know that kids with ADHD can struggle with routines, and it can be in any of those transition points. But I also kind of sit in that curiosity because I'm thinking that earlier concept of, okay, what's getting in the way of them being able to do well? What's going on in their body in the morning? So thinking about, are they craving connection time, for instance? Do they actually need some soothing of their nervous system? Do they need a predictable, consistent routine? Like, what does routine actually look like in the home? And some parents might think there's a routine happening, but for a kid with ADHD, does it need to be more clear, more visual? Does it need to have built-in? I know I talk about rituals a lot in my Jumpstart for Parenting program, but also in coaching calls. Do we build in little traditions, things that feel meaningful? It's kind, and I think about them as anchor points, Dana, like rituals in the routine, whether that be connection, like spending one-on-one time for even 5-10 minutes. Is it a sensory-based activity? Is it putting on their favorite song when they first get out of bed? Is it every Friday or Saturday morning is pancake morning? Healthy ones, of course. But that it's like I think about them as anchor points because they can support a child who has a dysregulated nervous system anchor back into a sense of safety. I know what's going to happen next. This feels predictable. And that actually in itself can reduce stress, which reduces the inflammation, which reduces the hyperarousal state. Mm-hmm. So those are just kind of some examples. It really depends on what's going on for the child. I know after school, for some, they've sometimes held it together at school. They come home and it's like, blah. Maybe they've got a blood sugar crash that's happened after school, depending on what they have or haven't.
I was going to actually say that as well. And I think that that's also really, really important in the morning. Sometimes our kids wake up and their blood sugar is completely crashed. The first thing they need to do is eat. Get food into that kid's mouth ASAP. And I think that that's the same for after school, especially for those that are on meds as well, because they're probably not eaten all day long. And they're probably coming off the meds. So I think, even if they're not on meds or on meds, I think the most important thing in the morning and the afternoon is, to really regulate their blood sugar.
Yeah, their food. And like thinking about, like you were saying, homework can be tricky. I'm thinking like, what are the trigger points for your child as well? The more we get to know what their trigger points are and why they're getting activated, could be shame, could be transition, could be change. I know we talk a lot about shame in our coaching calls. Sometimes homework is this place that brings up, I'm actually not good at this, or I can't focus. Is there something wrong with me? And so when we get to know, okay, are there particular points in the mornings, afternoon, or bedtimes that is stirring up an emotion for them that is causing a nervous system activation, then we can know how to respond to it. They might need a bit of soothing. They might need a bit of one-on-one time. They might need us to acknowledge those big feelings and thoughts that are going on. I know bedtime seems to be a really tricky one. If they're in hyperarousal all day, Dana, and then all of a sudden, and we're like doing lots of extracurricular activities, and then they're doing homework, and all of a sudden now it's bedtime, and there hasn't been a good wind down, or maybe there has been an attempt at wind down, but now they're still in a hyper aroused state, and we're expecting them to be able to lie in bed and bring down their nervous system to go to sleep. And we know a lot of them can't do that without us as support. For some littlies, even older ones, bedtime can signify like a separation anxiety. It's a disconnection in relationship. So that can be really tricky as well. And we know of kids with ADHD, just transitions are overwhelming. And it can be even transitioning from the bedroom to go downstairs to have breakfast or to get in the car to go to school. So throughout that, the routine, I guess to summarize, is a lot of consistency, predictability, building in fun, relational based rituals, as you said, food, and getting to know what might trigger them so that you're able to use that emotion coaching or connection before correction stuff to soothe their nervous system. Yeah. So that they go, oh, okay, throughout the morning, mom can see, or, my dad can see that I'm really struggling with this. I feel seen, heard, and validated and acknowledged.
Yeah.
And yes, it might mean that when you're doing these types of approaches in the mornings or nighttime, that you might not get exactly where you need to be on time. And I know that's what we talked about earlier, Dana, that can be frustrating, but hopefully the long route means that eventually you can get there with no stress at all, and everyone gets in the car feeling really good.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, sometimes we just got to let go of that fact. It doesn't matter if you're late, really. And I kind of think of, and this again has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's kind of like I get a lot asked by parents, my child still wets the bed, they're 9, they're 10. What can we do? Really just let go and just accept it, because some kids, there is like a chemical that gets made in their body that, gets created at a certain age to stop them urinating overnight. And some kids don't get that until later. And my son was the same. He was a late bloomer there. And, but I just let go of the outcome of that. And I knew that when he graduated high school or he graduated college, he would be fine.
Yeah.
So it's similar.
Sometimes, we push for change. So sometimes how can we let go of pushing for change really quickly when they're not quite there yet?
Yeah. And I think it's the same as if you are going to be late to karate lessons, or if you are going to be late to school at the age of 18, when they graduate high school, you're not even going to remember that day that you're late. And so really we're bringing a lot of stress and frustration into our lives that then's transferring onto our children that, is creating this, whirlwind. But I will also say that we do tend to over schedule these days. We put a lot of pressure on our kids that I remember I didn't have that pressure when I was growing up. I used to walk home from school. I'd get home at 3:00 in the afternoon, and then I'd have the whole afternoon until dinner time, till 6:00 to play outside.
Yeah. And we know that play is one way that children actually soothe their nervous system independently, even if they're playing on their own or with others, that it's actually a way for them to unwind their day's experiences, to, express their emotions. And if we kind of provide space for that, that can be super powerful as well.
Definitely. Look, just a couple of practical tips from my point of view when it comes to sort of morning and night routines. And I know you touched on it. Visual is really, really important. And so for some kids, they are visual people, and having that routine in pictures on the fridge where they go and tick off what they have to do, that provides that safety in knowing what is coming next and knowing what they've got to achieve. And so I do find that super, super helpful for morning and nighttime routines. Now, I think the biggest one, and maybe you agree or disagree, but I think one of the most common questions out of all of them that we get is, how do I deal with the meltdowns? How do I deal with the tantrums? And I suppose in your terminology, it's that fight or flight response that's going on in their nervous system.
Yeah. So that's it, Dana. If we're moving into that meltdown space, knowing that it is a fight, flight, sometimes a freeze, but usually that fight or flight response, then we can go, okay, I know this is happening in my kid's nervous system. They're actually in their survival brainstem response, which means they often have very little control over what's happening or what they're doing. But we also know that front part of the brain that's in charge of problem solving and rational and logic thinking is long gone. So we go, okay, trying to teach them or talk them into wanting to do well in that moment, if we can let go of that. And really hold compassion. I even find that when parents Dana, can actually really understand that my kid's in fight or flight and their little nervous system's actually telling their body and brain that they're not safe and they're not okay, even if their environment is safe, that does move parents into that compassion empathy space, because we can actually sit in that a little bit better rather than going, oh, my kid is consciously making that decision to do that. So if we can kind of ground ourselves in compassion and empathy, that's going to kind of drive how we respond or act in those meltdowns. In the moment, you might have to be doing a lot of coaching yourself as a parent, because how often when your kid's having that meltdown, that our body and our nervous system is going, danger, danger, we've done this again. Oh my gosh, how are we here again? And then we start to spiral into our own anxiety and anger as well, which is really, really tough. A lot of parents go, what happens if the meltdown is hurting somebody, or there's hitting and screaming and kicking happening? Of course, stepping in to pause your child's body if you can, if they're hurting a sibling or if they're about to hurt themselves. And it's saying things like, I can't let you hit your brother. I know you're having a really big feeling right now. So sometimes rather than even just saying, oh, you must be angry, or getting too much caught up into trying to emotion coach in meltdown, it's like, we actually just need to be with them. Let's ride that wave together. And sometimes it's just saying, I can see you're having a really hard time right now. Yeah, this is really big. This feels really hard. Yeah, I can't have you hitting, so I'm going to come close now. I might have to stop you from hitting, or I'm going to take that. There was a mum the other day that said the kid had like a big candle and was going to throw it. And, it was like, okay, how do we keep everyone safe? It was like, I can see you're about to throw that. You're so angry. Okay, I'm going to come near you now because I'm not sure if you're able to make a good choice. Or I'm going to need you to put that down because I can see how hard this is. I really want to help you. And she was able to kind of keep that tone of voice, really showing him, I can see you. I'm here with you. Yeah, I can see how hard this is. And he was able to pop that down. I don't know if it's kind of making sense around it, or if you can hear it's really about tone of voice, and it is about being with them in the moment. And again, holding that aim of, you want your child to feel seen, heard, and acknowledged, know how bad it's getting. Yeah. But also your own self-awareness of how dysregulated you might be coming as a parent in the moment. And if you're feeling like you're running out of resource, it's okay to take a break, depending how big that meltdown is. I know some parents say that meltdown can last 20 minutes sometimes. So it's like, okay, if you feel like you take a break, how do you communicate that to your child in a way that doesn't leave them feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm in trouble, or I've really upset, mum or dad. So you might actually say, hey, I can feel myself running out of steam here. I'm feeling myself get really frustrated. I'm just going to go take a moment to have a drink of water. I want to be really helpful for you. So I'm going to come back to check in on you if you need. Yeah, some parents feel like they need to just take that moment as well. Yeah, how's that feeling so far, Dana? Is that like,
yeah, look, I think it
realistic?
Yeah. Oh no, look, it is. Again, I think it's all about changing the expectations of the outcome. And and this is a big part of what I've learned over the years, is that a lot of the agenda that I used to try to achieve with my son when we were in these moments were really my agenda. Okay. And to put that pressure on, he was 4 or 5 at the time, is a lot. You think about their brains undeveloped, their nervous system undeveloped, everything is still growing and learning. And so here I am, an adult, trying to put my agenda on a child. And of course, that's not going to work. And so it really is changing that expectation of the situation. And the same thing, you don't have to change that meltdown. That meltdown happens. You don't have to stop it. You probably only want to stop it if you have to get somewhere, or that, you're so over it and you just can't deal with it anymore. And that's okay. As you said, you can take some time for yourself. But, all of these little changes, yes, it might not be the first time that you do it this way. It might not be the second time that you do it this way, but the more you do it this way, the more that fight or flight decreases.
Absolutely.
The more the stress and the tension in the house decreases, and in yourself, and then obviously in your child. And so, everything we've talked about today has really got that same theme, hasn't it?
Yeah. Changing the expectation. Be your child's external regulator. When they can't regulate themselves, we know from neuroscience, they need to borrow your nervous system in that moment. So if you can stay present, they're going to use your breath, your heart rate, your tone of voice to calm themselves. And that's going to help them feel safe. That's going to decrease the fight or flight.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's going to decrease the stress. It's going to decrease the inflammation, and it's going to decrease the ADHD symptoms. Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on today. Ashley, again, I love having you here every time that you're on this podcast. When I leave, I feel so calm. I feel like I am a super parent, and I go off and I can't wait to implement all the strategies that we talk about inside my family as well. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your experience with listeners. You can find more about Ashley at the ADHD Thrive Institute. She has a Jumpstart for Parenting program that focuses on kids with ADHD, because we all know traditional parenting approaches don't necessarily work for kids with ADHD. So Ashley has created an amazing program. You can find more about that at the ADHD Thrive Institute. Ashley, thank you so much once again.
Thank you as well, Donna. Always great to chat.
It always is. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Donna Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.